First piece is called Transmutation. She transmuted herself into a corporate entity, Blonde Inc. As a pioneer in that particular convention of personhood, many investigated her legitimacy. How does one focus their existence into an inorganic concept? She thought it curious that the question was always how and never why. She replied, litigation and vivisection. This next one is this is called Happy Anniversary. He pointed to the chart of the inverse relationship in our relationship. He drew his finger seductively along the time horizon. It represented time spent together. Linear time, I asked? Time is always linear, he said. Can't be anything but linear. He liked to be exact. I begged him not to be so literal, to which he said, how else would one talk about charts? I asked, total hours or simply time passed? He claimed that all time was past, his voice annoyed. I claimed present and future as time. He said we were talking about our relationship, not verb tenses. I found it interesting that he mentioned verbs, since there were so few of them in our relationship. Exactly, he pointed at the diagonal purple line. Is this about sex? No, he said, and stabbed the chart with his finger. Time past increased infrequency of sex. I corrected him. You mean frequency. He preferred to use negative terms to talk about negative things. He did not like to be corrected. Desire is a complex equation, I said. It was a simple chart. Why could I not understand, he shouted. I asked where was the jagged line of resentment. How about the scatter plot of loneliness points across an Adirondack sky? There needs to be a depression-era plummet line for communication. What about the empty pie charts of affection? You forgot to diagram the twins in lovely shades of then. His eyes went dead. That would be a circle, he said. I declared his charts meaningless. He assured me charts don't lie.
Thank you, Tori. Fun. So now we're down to just the staff of the magazine, unless there's anybody else that wants to read. Let's see. Do we want anybody? John, Felisa, Jen?
Sorry, well,
Would you like to read?
Sure.
John is our associate. No, he's actually our editor. Now he was the associate managing editor for the first issue, and now he's moved into position number 1 for the second. So here's John McGeary.
Thanks.
Do you want to be video?
Probably should.
Okay.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. I did just want to after this, but wanted to thank all our staff and support and people who did fundraising and supported us through funds, as well as all of our writers. Thank you so much for being here. This was a great thing, and I'm going to thank Tracy so much for really putting this event together. It's just very exciting, very happy to be here. Thanks so much to Fringies for hosting. So thanks everybody, it's been really fun, so thanks for reading. Don't applaud yet. So this is a short story. Hopefully it won't take me too long to get through it, but this is, I'm from the Pittsburgh area. This is a legend of Pittsburgh, and I've had trouble tracing down the origins of it, but there's a possibility that some of it might be true. So I have an interest in folklore and mythology. So this is called, did I mess up your picture? Sorry. This is called Smiling at You, the Clown Doll Legend of Pittsburgh. The house had belonged to the nuns of St. Peter's once. Still in the neighborhood, but secluded, set back from the street and surrounded by a large, fenced yard that begged for a dog. The house maintained the perfect balance of privacy without absence. The deep porch darkened the visage, and the large pillared pine trees draped constant shadows across the house. Strange they do no decorating on the outside of the house, she thought. The family had a passion for beautiful things, and that peculiar interest in curiosity dealers that some people deem delightful and artsy, and others find odd. She had babysat for them before, but she had not babysat for them before, but had been to the house with her parents for a Sunday brunch. Sculptures and large frame pictures, wall-sized bookshelves and with archaic books, captured by Byzantine bookends, handmade instruments from the other side of the world, everything different filled the house. After the parents left, with the usual overly thorough emphasis on cell phone numbers on the fridge, the children played above, thumping and tumbling across the floor, but always sounding like more than two at play. When at last the sun went pink, with teeth brushed and inspected, and sleeping onesies zipped, and the wall of stuffed friends reassembled, she tucked them in. The children, too, were collectors, and tidying the room took time because each toy and animal lived in one spot and no other. When she tried to place a stuffed tiger, she had it taken from her with the reprimand, "That's where Teddy stands." It was cute rather than annoying, but she did notice the place left empty when she had finished. As she tucked in the 5-year-old, he whispered, "Teddy says you're pretty." She left the nursery and started at the face of Ronald McDonald looking at her from the upstairs studio room. She peeked in to see the framed original movie posters and a framed Bob Marley t-shirt and cardboard cutout figures of Boba Fett, the Terminator, E.T., and Ronald McDonald, and others. She went downstairs. The things that lived in the house would look different in the day, though not normal, odd things with that uncomfortable flair of artistry. The dark unmasked them. Unholy shadows spread large wings across the walls, rising with the night, but these were empty phantoms. She descended to the basement den and turned on the TV, prepared to sit through the remaining hours. Like a specter in a closet, decided the dark and time to haunt arrived, the feeling of presence appeared, but slowly, by and by. Then, the moment floated sideways, in the steady evaporation of warmth from the room, constricting her throat down her spine to the small of her back. A sense insisted on recognition, like the final settling of a mist over on the valley floor. And like that, aware eyes were also in the room. Like a whisper on the nape of her neck, the feeling of being watched manifested itself so physically that she had turned and looked about the room. She tried to return to the TV, but the feeling in the room continued to rise like pressure in the air, and her breathing came faster and faster until she fled from the basement. The living room had a quieter mood. The feeling of presence within was less oppressive and settled less in her chest. Stark shadows rested peacefully, with only the distant halo of the streetlight at the end of the driveway. The basement stairwell blinked with the blue light of the TV she had left on. Lost in the slow click, click, click of the grandmother clock, she misheard the flurry of little feet on the stairs. A creak on the landing turned her head. The landing window outlined the form standing in small defiance. But as she rose to attend it back to bed, its courage flew and the little figure ran upstairs. She followed. But all was quiet on the nursery floor. There was no flutter of covers or silence of whispers. The beds were full and the blankets buried deep. Instead, as she left the bedroom, a shadow passed across the light from the landing window. A breath of wind had given the curtains a dance. But as she reached the foot of the stairs, she realized that window has no curtains. She turned and watched the light continue through the window unbroken. Only when she retraced her steps and passed in front of the window herself did the light flit. I imagined it then. Somewhere below, a floorboard rasped. She listened. It's an old house. She returned to the living room and sat, but the feeling of rest slowly retreated from there as well. The basement stairway still yawned, and the blue light continued to pulse from deep within the empty maw. The TV must be what generated the feeling. Descending quickly before her mind changed, she sensed, rather than saw, a scurrying in the room, like the TV flitted in agitation of turning off. She hurried to it, but froze in the center of the room. In a corner, half hidden by the TV cabinet, stood a tiny clown doll. Standing, hands folded in front, head listed delicately, lips closed in a taut grin with red circles around its eyes and mouth and a tiny rubber nose, all smeared over with white foundation, it stared at her from heavily darkened eyes. The eyes looked too alive. They held her, and she had to watch. As blue TV light flickered within the unblinking glass, the thought that the eyes did not blink did not bring comfort. The taut, closed-mouthed grin and the care to detail the crinkling of skin around the corners of the eyes added an unnatural life to the face that shouldn't be. Though the feeling of presence remained unshaken and the location of emanation had energy within the clown, the immediate irrational fear that it lived faded. She drew away from it, though she would not turn her back on it. But once thought, the sense of rational calm, allowed her to think and force herself to steady breathing. She told herself that this could be dealt with. She could not simply leave the basement again, not while knowing it was there. The power of the eyes and the feeling of presence dictated that. She could turn it toward the wall and extinguish the TV light from its eyes and end there watching her. But she had not yet achieved that rational calm. The idea that touching it did not cause her to doubt what she had already achieved. This not possible, she could lay a blanket over the doll. Then she realized that whatever she did, she should probably get permission, knowing that the family was particular about their things. But she suddenly felt a very strange apprehension about the thing, seeing her take out her cell phone. I just don't want it watching me, she told herself. But she left the living room and dialed the mother's phone. Left for the living room. The brief intermediate confusion took a few minutes to clear up. Yes, everything is fine. No, they're asleep. But then the reality of the silliness of the conversation entered. I'm really sorry, it's really stupid. But I'm really bothered by the clown doll downstairs, and I was wondering if I could move it. For a while, there was nothing on the other end. Hello? The grandmother clock grew louder. From the phone, what doll? The clown doll by the TV? Tick, 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 tick. In a whisper, get the kids and get out of the house. Then even the dim light of the living room died. Tick, tick, tick. What? Get the kids, get out of the house. We're on our way home. But get the kids, get out of the house. Can you do that? Tick, tick, tick. Yes. She hung up the phone. The stairs to the basement blinked more wickedly than before. She crept up the stairs to the bedrooms. The stuffed animals crowded the room, and a new hush held the house still. She picked up the younger child and grabbed the older by the hand. Their feet on the steps creaked and resounded through the house. She halted them on the landing to listen. Tick, tick. Waiting didn't work. She rushed the children quietly down to the first floor, but stopped again. The basement was dark. The light of the TV silenced. The front door, outlined by glass and glowing in the light of the streetlight, stood at the end of the dark hallway, a black tunnel and silent as the shadows. She held her breath all the way to the door. As she dropped the hand she held to unbolt the door, the child beside her stared back toward the living room and waved a goodbye. She pulled the door open and blue and red lights burned as the police cars turned the corner. Still holding the youngest, she pushed the other out the door, yanked the door closed, and ran to the sidewalk before she turned. Pressed against the glass, staring at them, white painted face and a red grin, the clown doll still smiled. The house had never owned a clown doll, but the neighborhood had a schizophrenic midget, and he had a black van and a ladder. For the police, the only name he ever gave was Theodore. The children had been saying with more and more frequency that Teddy would watch them sleep. Thank you.
Great, John. Thank you so much. You see what's heading up this new literary magazine. That's bizarre way. I have a short piece, and I guess that'll be the last piece of the night. I guess if there's nobody else. Yeah, sure. Okay. So thank you for hanging out for all this, and I don't know about you, but I think it was great.
Can I read these?
Yeah. So people take them on the way out, and tell your friends. So, all right. This piece is actually the first memoir piece I ever wrote. I wrote it 30 years ago when I was teaching middle school or junior high school English, and we were doing a lesson on how to write a descriptive essay, and that was in a small town in Iowa. And I thought, these kids have no idea of, I thought I needed, after I wrote the lesson plan, I thought I need a sample, and these kids have no idea about where I'm from. So I wrote Friday Night at Bubba's. Every Friday night, Bubba Ida's dining room table became her canvas, stretching centuries, laden with chicken soup, matzo balls, boiled chicken, kigel, challah, bow ties and kasha, and of course her own kamish bread. Our family, as well as any other neighbors or friends who picked up on the aroma, crowded into her 4-room row house apartment at 6727 Horrocks Street, Northeast Philadelphia, to eat in shifts. Those coming directly from work, along with the children, would eat first. The second shift poked around the living room, looking at the same old photographs, munching on salted peanuts and chocolate kisses, smoking or just squeezing together on the sofa, gulping down the rich, luscious air of Bubba's house. Aunt Jean, just home from work, still wearing her Lenny's Hot Dogs uniform, would dutifully sit in the same chair each week while Bubba brought her soup. Aunt Jean served fast food at a hot dog stand at 5th and Passyunk Avenue all day to people she called baby and doll. She willingly surrendered her public persona as Bubba's steamy soup seeped through her. She ended her meal with a Raleigh cigarette. She let me count the coupons. She chewed Dentyne and carried 4 packs in her handbag, always one there for me. Aunt Min and Aunt Bess hovered around the table, broad jumping to the refrigerator should any man or child ask for ketchup or butter. Bubba couldn't understand why anyone would need ketchup, so you couldn't find any on the table, and butter was traced with chicken. It wasn't allowed. But no one knew from one at Bubba's house, so it was with impish delight that Aunt Minnie and Aunt Bessie made sure that the contraband got into the right hands. No one waited very long for anything. In fact, the second shift usually ended up at the table with the slower eaters of the first shift, who were unwilling and often unable to give up their thrones. The table talk usually centered around the hot dog business. Almost everyone worked for Uncle Lenny, except for my parents, who had their own luncheonette, Abe's Hot Dogs, at 4th and Monroe. Aunt Bess worked at Lenny's on Castor Avenue. Aunt Minnie did not, although her husband, Uncle Joe, went to work for Lenny after he lost his job in the late 1960s. The sisters, Min and Bess, resembled each other, sharing many of the same facial features and sense of humor. Aunt Bessie was a brunette. Aunt Minnie dyed her hair fire engine red. People would see Bess working the counter at Lenny's on Castor and remark, "Oh, you've darkened your hair." "No, you're thinking of my sister, our Minnie," she would reply. The words, "my sister, our Minnie," dripped from her mouth, sweet as pie a la mode, famishing any sisterless soul like me. Cousin Lily was one of the oldest grandchildren, only a few years younger than my mother. When Lily's mother died young, Bubba raised Lily along with my mother and her younger brother Lenny, the three youngest children. Lily didn't work for Lenny and was proud of it. She wore bright, tight clothes over her ample frame, and every inch of her said, "Notice me." I imagine this was to be expected from the 11th child. She complained that the cigarette smoke on Friday night at Bubba's irritated her asthma and that there was too much food. She didn't stay long, but like all of Bubba's children, she always finished her plate. My own Auntie Mame, Cousin Lily drove a convertible and took me away on weekends to Long Beach Island, New Hope, movies, and theater. Early on, she whet my appetite for the freedom and excitement of the road, as well as the comfortable embrace of coming home. This was the table where I spent every Friday night for the first 12 years of my life. I was one of the kids whom Bubba Ida fed first. I remember the quiver of her wrinkled, vein-striped hands as she carried my bowl of hot soup between them. She didn't flinch when that steamy broth leaked down her sagging arms toward her elbows. Bubba crossed an ocean to bring me that soup. Feeding me was her goal. Mortal affliction would not come between us. The soup contained all of her hopes for a better life for herself, her family, and her world. It made the struggles of her past, as well as the creeping injustices of old age, recede into the background, at least on Friday night. Bubba infused her children, my mom, aunts and uncles, my cousins, my brothers, and me, with her fire, and fortified us with the soup that was her antidote to physical or spiritual suffering. She left 25 grandchildren who now have grandchildren. She encouraged us to feed the fire of life, and as well to fan death's flame. So that's it. Thank you all for coming, and good night. And the next one will be Thursday, first Thursday in April. Come back. Great, thanks. Did they know what I knew? I'd be shaking pretty hard too if I were to be laid out on fancy china, an ugly, colorless, spongy mound garnished with an overcooked carrot slice and a dab of garish horseradish. It all seemed too great a sacrifice, but I'd make it up to them. I'd never eat gefilte fish. I'd rush outside, nose struck by a hard ball. A man, stomach tied together with apron strings, shoved a block of what looked like wood into the top of a grinder. Out came horseradish, the source of my aching nose. I wasn't fooled by its neutral color. Later, it would be dyed blood red with beet juice. We escaped the carnage, ducking into Martin's Wholesale City. This place could cure all ills of the mind and spirit. A blonde woman with a raspy voice sat perched on a high stool behind the counter and a thick cloud of smoke. She knew the exact location of every item in the store. Rubber bands, right side, aisle 4, halfway down, she'd bark from her throat. I wondered if she had legs. I never saw them. She never moved, except to light up another cigarette. If it came back to her exasperated, she'd become more specific. Red, white, and blue box next to paper clips, underneath the reinforcements above the Scotch tape. Her eyes kicked into place like lemons in a slot machine as she keyed out an office supply. Bingo, she'd say, when you arrived at her counter with your rubber bands. I couldn't wait to shop there for my school supplies. Black and white bound hardback books with lined paper called out to me. Only when I owned these would I know what it was like to be a schoolgirl in the world. When that day came, I wouldn't have to ask where to find them. We went to Lou's Deli next, because in front of the display cases, they had pickle barrels. Prongs were tied to the barrels for snagging pickles in the brine. There were plastic bags on either side to plop your pickle in, as if it were a goldfish. I never remembered to roll up my sleeve before I leaned in to pluck a fat one. The others would slither up beside my arm. For the rest of the morning, I'd have to endure the acrid smell of my wet sleeve and dripping arm. If I'd wet my pants, I couldn't have been more uncomfortable.
but they sold penny candy next to the cashier to absorb my mother's change. She preferred Hershey almonds. I liked Tootsie Rolls. She taught me at a young age the power of chocolate to chase down sour pickles. We'd window shop our way home, and images from an adult world filled my mind. Will I have bosoms like ice cream cones? The nude mannequins at the Jean Clevin shop do. My mother and aunts didn't. Can I have one of those crystal balls? Silver balls threw light around the window displays. I wanted to hold one between my hands and look inside for Auntie Anne and the Wicked Witch. But my mother was already in front of Spurt's shoe store. What will you choose for your first day of school? My mother quizzed me. My sisters and I all got bunions from hand-me-down shoes. Bubba bought them off a pushcart. They ruined our toes. I always swore, if nothing else, my kids would have new shoes. The story was already familiar to me, lingering over the purple velvet Mary Janes. The black suede with sensible strap might be better. What about tap shoes? With each pair, a new image of running, skipping, dancing down winding streets in far-off lands enveloped me. Pressed against Spurt's window, Mom and I dreamed of the day when my perfect toes in brand new shoes would step into line in the world beyond the avenue. And I brought this poem, and the other reason was somebody else was supposed to come who also has a daughter who was adopted from Vietnam. And so I brought this poem that I wrote for her. I wrote about her when she reached adolescence. I adopted her when she was 14 months, and now she's turning 16. This is called Lucky. Saigon, 1998. She who carries the heat and the sea is handed to me in a heartbeat, proud and strong, where tiny lungs labor through time's phlegmy chest, rattled breath sacrificing yin of the ancients for the comfort that da brings. She sings past the clutter in our ancestral emphysema. She brings the heat and the sea and the promise of continuance. Sit up, child. Soon you will be a Barbie. They prop her up, wipe her nose. She Vietnam, they ask us? Yes, we submit. She's lucky. We're lucky. It's plain to see. In our first unbridled cyclo ride, grappling iron fingers, grappling with new life. Ardmore, 2008. She who carries the heat and the sea, slender tween, sings and sways to a beat, proud and strong. No trace of labor or sense of lack, as she casts a line toward adolescence. Deep within her form, like so many flecks of rice, polished by the ages, her first unbridled cycle speaks the promise of continuance. She who carries the heat and the sea, seasons her language with salty shards of youth, melts chocolate hearts in her palm. Her blood remembers the heat and the sea, where generations of fish spawn generations of family under thatched roofs, saluting the heat of dawn, swaying with the tide at dusk. She carries their blood, but her memory is free. She who carries the heat and the sea, beholden to no one, breathes confidence, speaks her mind, grapples with new emotions. She will be what she will be. But the blood that flows from her heart to the sea carries me, lucky, lucky. So that's you're welcome. And I don't know if anybody's inspired to do anything else. We're here. Great, come on up. And what's your name? Helen is going to come up. Great. Helen.
up here. I'm Helen Reese. Hello. Actually, it's your friend who didn't come who told me to come tonight. Louis. Yeah.
Great.
I joined a writer's group at Borders with him some time ago, and that's where I began my first novel, which I really just completed. So I thought I'd read you a little bit of the first chapter. It's called Project X, as in ex-boyfriends. I've had a few. This is my second husband, but prior to that, I've had a few. I sat there on the deck of my cabin on the SS Vandermeer, staring at the ocean. The sea was calm now, but it had been a rough night. Waves crashing against the ship with terrifying ferocity. I told myself it was the violent rocking of the ship, flinging me from one side of the bed to the other, that had kept me up all night. However, I knew it wasn't true, and that I would have had an endless night of tossing and turning, even if the ocean had been calm. By 4 a.m., when the waves began to subside, my thoughts were still churning. Finally, at 5:30, I crawled out of bed, splashed cold water on my face, and crept out to the balcony, tiptoeing past my best friend Carol, who thankfully was an Olympian sleeper. Tomorrow, we dock in Costa Rica, and while Carol was whizzing through the rainforest on a zip line, I'd be on a plane heading home to Philadelphia to try and pick up the pieces of my life. The life that restaurant critic / investigative reporter and all-around scumbag Jared Abrams had worked so hard to destroy. I scrunched my eyes shut, and as my head lolled back against the chaise lounge, I tried to force all thoughts of Abrams from my mind. However, the ache in my back and the emptiness that was gnawing at my heart reminded me of another sleepless night, just 9 months earlier, right after my 50th birthday, when I placed the fateful ad on Facebook that had changed everything. Turning 50 had kindled something in me. Whoops. A yearning, a desire for change, for coming to terms with the past, for letting go and moving on. The realization that I'd lived for half a century, had consumed me, propelling me to take action on fulfilling my dreams now. Maybe if I sort through all that's happened over the last 9 months just one more time, I thought, I'll be able to figure out what went wrong and how I can get my life back on track. The ad on Facebook, that was the catalyst. And then Project X took on a life of its own. Part 1. Lydia online. Sick and tired of being an ex-boyfriend? If you're also one of my exes, I'd like to hear from you. I'm a therapist conducting research for a special project on dead-end dates and failed relationships. No strings attached, no hidden agendas, and no cost to you. Call Lydia Birnbaum, MSW, or email me at. It was 2 a.m. and I was still tossing and turning. I'd gone to bed around 10, but knew I wouldn't get much sleep, since I just returned home from yet another date from hell with a man I'd met on a singles website. Truthfully, I was the one who was sick and tired. Sick and tired of the dating scene. Sick and tired of listening to men I barely knew tell endlessly boring stories about their endlessly boring lives. Sick and tired of sitting face to face with men who'd assured me they looked just like Boris Becker, but who turned out to be dead ringers for Boris Karloff. And I was particularly sick and tired of my pattern of running to my own therapist, as wonderful and nurturing and gifted as Gwen was, every time I encountered another rejection. I just turned 50, and I was feeling sick and tired of just about everything when the idea to place the ad popped into my head. I had to face it, my life was going nowhere. My job as case manager at Grierside Psychiatric was rewarding but demanding and seemed to sap most of my energy. I had only a few clients left in the private practice I'd been struggling to build in the few odd hours I could devote to it over the last 6 years, and, as evidenced by tonight's disastrous date, my social life was non-existent. I'd met this cyber psycho at a little Italian bistro about 10 minutes from my home in Bryn Mawr, a gingerbread Seven Sisters town located on the main line, the exclusive and exclusionary suburbs that was home to many of the wealthiest and most influential people in the Philadelphia area, except me, of course. And actually, he did look just as cute as the photo he posted in his profile on JDate. However, although I remembered he described himself as separated, it took only 5 minutes for me to find out he was still living with his wife. Let me get this straight, I said. You and your wife are still living together in the same house? Well, he replied, now that my girlfriend broke up with me, I'm back in the house with my wife. Now that your girlfriend broke up with you, what do you mean? I began feeling a little dizzy, although I hadn't even taken a sip from the glass of Sauvignon Blanc I'd ordered only a few minutes earlier. We were madly in love, my girlfriend and me. She wasn't the first woman I've been with since my divorce, since my wife and I separated, but she was the best and it was wonderful. So what happened, I asked, although what I should have said was, excuse me, I think that I left the oven on and I need to get home immediately. Well, he said, looking sadder than the most depressed of my few weekly clients, things just didn't work out. She said I wasn't ready for commitment. I disagree, I said. I think you're screaming out for commitment. I just wonder if there are any beds available at the psych hospital where I work. He stared at me in disbelief. What did you say? Oh, never mind, I said. I'm obviously wasting your time as much as you're wasting mine because I'm a lesbian. He was frozen, dumbstruck. I downed the Sauvignon Blanc in 2 gulps. Why the hell did you answer my ad if you're a lesbian? He eventually sputtered. What are you, a friggin' lunatic? One of us is a lunatic, I hollered back, grabbing my purse and heading for the door, but it isn't me. To be honest, this isn't how things turned out, and no, I'm not gay. This is just one of the myriad fantasies I've invented about the single men I've met over the last 12 years. It helps my ego, temporarily at least, if I can visualize myself as the one who walks out the door with her chin held high, even though in reality, things rarely turn out that way.
Okay. Thank you. That was great. I'm really glad you came. I'll have to tell Louis. So, anybody else? Or anybody that's read, want to read anything else? So that was great, and I hope you'll come again and bring something to read. I mean, we do this every month, usually the first Thursday of every month, and if you give me your email on the list, you'll be put on the list, and so you'll be notified. But we do it here, and usually the first Thursday of every month. So you just show up, that's great too. Great. Thank you. Thank you all.